Okay, everybody, we're getting to 10 now, so we're going to start our next talk. Hello. If I can get everybody's attention. Our next talk here is going to be with Gareth Bromser-Kloeden. He's a senior software engineer at Mobius Materials. He'll be talking about the JavaScript Temporal AI.
Cool. Thank you, Dylan, for the intro. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So my presentation is called Just in Time. It's about Temporal, which is the really cool new API/specification that is kind of in JavaScript at the moment, which I'll elaborate on what I mean by that later, for date and time handling. Today's Pi Day. We're at RBA.js. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. Yeah, so like Dylan said, my name is Gareth. I work at Mobius Materials. I think the website says I work at a different place because when I submitted my proposal back in like December, I had a different job, but now I work at Mobius in Richmond. So it's a good place. More importantly than all this, I'm a software developer who has had bad experiences with daytime handling in JavaScript. So show of hands, who has had to work with dates and time in JavaScript? A lot of people. Who has enjoyed it? Far less people. You enjoy it, yeah. Who has found it frustrating? A lot of people, yeah. Dates in JS, there's a couple ways of handling this. Historically, the date object, when you type new date, call the method, all that, this is what JavaScript has offered, I think since it came out in like the early 90s. And it's not great. I'm going to go over some of the reasons it's not great in my future slides, but suffice to say, we can do better, and that's why Temporal exists. So because date is not great, people often reach for libraries. Moment.js for a long time was the biggest one. Now we have date-fns, Luxon, day.js, and a whole host of other ones that you kind of need, I think. I have not worked in a large-scale web project in maybe ever that didn't reach for one of these date libraries just because working with the native date is such a pain. And now we have Temporal. Hooray, it's going to fix everything and take us to the promised land, hopefully. So let's talk about the date object. This is the very basics of how you use it. New date, you feed it a set of parameters saying what you want. So 2025-3/14, that's today. Run the code. RBA.js is Monday, April 14th. That's not right. That's actually next month. So this illustrates one of my problems with date, which is that months are zero indexed. Yeah, let's fix this. If we go into, that's not the right one. If we go into our code, we can actually fix this. New date. We have to make it a 2 because March is 2 due date. Great, Friday, March 14th. So as developers, we're used to zero indexing for arrays and the like, but I still think it's stupid that dates are zero indexed. It's the only context that I know of where that's the case. So just an illustration of one of the problems with date. Some other ones, it's actually based on the original Java date utility, which itself was deprecated in Java in like Java 8 in 2014 or something. So when people say the only thing Java and JavaScript have in common is the name, they're actually wrong. The date object is straight inspired from Java, unfortunately. Zero index month we just went over. The date object is based on the Unix epic. I don't really know the nitty gritty of this, but like summarize it by saying prior to January 1st, which is when the universe started in Unix world, things get weird. It's also why when you log out milliseconds, it's like since that time period, which can just cause problems because it doesn't behave how you would think. Time zone state is really bad at time zones. It actually knows about exactly 2 time zones when you use it. One is UTC time, which is sort of like the standard universal fixed time. The other is your local time zone where you are. So if we're here in the Eastern Standard Time and you want to find out what time it is in California, you have to do a bunch of squirrely stuff with date or reach for a library to find that out. By itself, it just can't do it. Limited formatting, another thing people reach for libraries for, like if you want to format the date that the last slide provided, you have to do direct string manipulation on it, which is just kind of messy. There's no standardization. So a library like date-fns, for example, you put your nice little YYYY-mm-dd format to handle all that. But it would be nice if we could handle it natively. What else? Duration is not a concept that exists to date, which is a weird thing for a datetime library. So duration, how long does something take? This presentation will ideally take 45 minutes, probably longer because I like to talk, but you can't do that with date. Date math is hard. If I want to find out what is 1 month from now, I do plus whatever, and it just doesn't work like you would think in all the scenarios. You get into these weird little edge cases where it's really hard to figure out how the heck do I figure out future or past dates. Only the Gregorian calendar is supported. It's not a huge issue for most of us because most of the world, at least business, runs on the Gregorian calendar. But it's not the only calendar system in the world. There's the Hebrew calendar, the Chinese lunar calendar, the Islamic calendar, and you can't do it with the native date. It's very, how do you say, Western biased. My least favorite thing about date is its mutability, where when you make one of those date objects and you do operations to it, kind of has like a getter setter API where you can set date as a method. It will straight up mutate the original object, which, like any mutability, is just sort of a source of bugs. There's ways to deal with it, and some of the libraries put immutability on top of it, but natively date is mutable, which just causes bugs when you don't expect them. So let's talk about libraries next. Yeah, I wrote a note to myself for show NPM downloads. So let's do it. Let's look at NPM. Everybody likes libraries, as they should, for dates. And Moment, by way of example, despite the fact that it's explicitly a quote legacy project in maintenance mode, it still gets about 20 million weekly downloads, which is a lot. If we look at some of the other ones, like date-fns, VCU Wi-Fi is cooperating, thank you. 22 million downloads. Luxon, 10 million. And Day.js is the last big one I know of, which also has around 20 million. So between those three, it's like 50 million weekly downloads. That's a whole lot. Let's say that's evidence that people like date libraries. There's a whole bunch of other like random little ones like Xdate. I don't know. There's so many of them, but we're in the tens of millions for people downloading libraries. What's the problem with libraries? They're not free. Well, you don't have to pay for them typically because we live in an open source world, but they have a bundle size cost, you could call it. Moment once upon a time was 0.5 MB, which is like absurd for a single library. I don't know if that was gzipped or not. I really hope that was uncompressed because that would be even crazier. Inconsistent APIs, yeah, like all these libraries, you interact with them differently. If you learn Moment.js, you don't know date-fns, etc. Some of them make attempts to be kind of interoperable, but nevertheless, like you're at the whims of the library authors. This is a weird one. Like some of these date libraries will piggyback on the global namespace or prototype inheritance and like mess things up. I've never really run into problems with this, but like if you have two date libraries in the same project, you could, because they're both mutating the prototype or something like that. You would ask, why would you have two date libraries? Well, if you're migrating from one to another, then you might have them both installed. Yeah, they often use date under the hood, so they inherit a lot of those problems. They're kind of like band-aids on top of it for a lot of these. I'm not hating on libraries, by the way. I have like enormous respect for the authors of these, and like we are so lucky that people dealt with this gnarly problem. Like these libraries have generated billions and billions of dollars in business value for so many of us. But it sure would be great if we didn't need them anymore. Let's put the Moment people out of work, I guess. All right, Temporal. Let's talk about the fun stuff now. I think I've been negative on date handling for about 10 minutes now. So Temporal is our new way of dealing with dates and times in JavaScript. I like to think of it like the math operator or object, or whatever you call it for dates. So if you know like math.floor, math.round, all of the nice built-in math methods that we have in JavaScript, Temporal is like superficially similar, but for dates and times. And times, yes, importantly. Here's a quote from MDM, Mozilla Developer Network, about what Temporal is. It enables date and time management in various scenarios, including built-in time zone and calendar representation, wall clock time conversions, arithmetics. I've never heard arithmetics plural before. Maybe they're British like maths, formatting, and more. Most importantly, so important that I bolded it, it's designed as a full replacement for the date object. So like date is out. We don't like date, we like temporal. One more slide on what the heck temporal is and what its value prop is. Easy to use APIs for date and time computations, time zones, including daylight savings time, which we all dealt with recently. Fixed date and times. This is kind of a hard one conceptually, at least it was for me. Like time is relative, and I don't really mean like theory of relativity way. I mean like it's 10 here, it's 7:10 in California. Temporal like has good ways of dealing with that essentially. Parsing on a string format, something else about date, and I think some of the libraries too is like they don't standardize on parsing, so you like feed it a bunch of different strings and come out with a bunch of different strings, which is annoying. Non-Gregorian calendars. These are copy-pasted from TC39, by the way, so this is what the people who wrote the specification think you should know about temporal, and I tend to trust them because they're the reason I get paid at the end of the day. All right, little history on temporal. Where did it come from? When did it come from? Where is it today? In the old era of 2017, this problem was first recognized. TC39 got together and said, we don't like how dates are handled in JavaScript. We should fix this. 2018, the first sort of prototype of it was presented. Somebody said, hey, let's make this thing. I don't know if it was called temporal at the time. So it was either temporal or like proto-temporal. But that's when they coalesced around the first sort of iteration of what this thing would be. By 2019, it was in stage 1. 2020, stage 2. Great. So we're moving at a really good clip. It's going through a single stage a year. About 2021, stage 3. So 2022, stage 4. No, actually. It's now 2025, and we are still in stage 3. So it's been stuck in stage 3 for about 4 years now, which sounds like a long time because that is a long time. What does stage 3 mean, by the way? Quote, TC39, the proposal has been recommended for implementation. This effectively means it's done. Like the temporal spec is not completely set in concrete, but it's ideally completely unchanged. And they're telling people who write JavaScript engines, you should go put this in your JavaScript engine. Why did it take this long? Why is it not in yet? A couple reasons. COVID is one, of course, like that threw a wrench in everything around 2020. It's really, really complex. The entire sort of problem space of date and time handling is really big. It's like all of time, all of dates. Related to that, the temporal API itself is really big. It has like hundreds of methods in there. And maybe most importantly is that they really want to get it right this time. It's kind of like their one shot to not screw it up. They being TC39, I guess. You know, we don't like date. We have to use libraries. We have this known problem. And if they get it wrong and 5 years from now, we're like, well, you know what? Temporal was a mistake. Let's go make temporal 2 or whatever. Then we would be in a very bad place. So I'm willing to give them the time it takes to get it right. Them including browser vendors and people who make Node.js and all that stuff as well. Like this is much their responsibility now to implement this as anyone else. All right, so the rest of this is pretty much going to be examples of learning temporal and what the most kind of like high level important things that you will use the most with it is. So it's code samples essentially and what they do. The most basic thing you can do with temporal is get what time and date is it right now where I am in my time zone. The toString is just normal to string. You don't actually need that to use it. But if we dissect this real quick, the way you use this is with the temporal object, capital T. It is like math. It's like a first class object in JavaScript that you just call with whatever method you want. And as mentioned, there's like many methods you chain off of this. But the most basic one is this. And it's not working. Hold on. Let's take a look at the console to see why it's not working. Oh, temporal is not defined. Haha, I did this on purpose, actually. No one expected that. So here's the problem. This is caniuse.com as of last night for temporal. It's a whole lot of red, just like the stock market right now. Yeah, no browsers support temporal. They just don't. Firefox has it behind a flag, I guess. I'm using Arc at the moment, which is a Chromium browser, so I assume Chrome does not support it, Arc does not support it. So that's the end of my presentation. Temporal doesn't work. You can all go home. Just kidding. thankfully we have polyfills. There's a couple different polyfills out there for temporal. These are two of them that I know of. The one I am using or going to use in a second is temporal polyfill. And yeah, like we're in a good place where you can load one of these polyfills and access the entire API. This is worth taking a quick note on like what is a polyfill if you're not familiar. Essentially, TC39 doesn't do anything. That's not fair. TC39 writes specifications. They say like, here's kind of the blueprint. Here's what we need the thing to do. And it's up to the individual authors of browsers and JavaScript engines, runtimes, all that to take the spec and actually implement it. So a polyfill like this is essentially an implementation of the specification for temporal that utilizes things that are already in JavaScript to make it work and expose the high-level API of temporal. So what I'm going to do is go back here. I'm going to go to my code. I'm going to find my script, and I'm going to uncomment the temporal polyfill that I conveniently had loaded here. And now, wow, it works. Temporal is now defined. So that's what you get. You get a very, not very nicely formatted output, just kind of a raw string there of what time it is, March 14th, 10:16 seconds, milliseconds, and it gives you the time zone as well. So something cool you can do with this is mess with the time zone. If I find my right thing. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, like temporal has native time zone handling, which means you can provide it one of these standardized time zone strings. And if I refresh, that's what time it is in Berlin. We'll do one more just for fun. You can do Asia, Tokyo. In Tokyo, it is that time. So point being, it's really easy to put whatever time zone you want in there. This is like super convenient compared to date again, because it only knows about 2 time zones by itself. Temporal apparently knows about all of them, which is really great. Polyfill. Okay, something else that temporal does that I really like is it offers a separation of date and time. So in the date object, you get it all together. And yes, you can like parse it out and break it apart. But by default, you just get the whole shebang of what date and time is it. Temporal has this thing called plain date, which is like it sounds, it's just the date. So we'll use it to get today, which is what is like right now. It has this method. You can also pass it very like readable, nice looking parameters, literally month, year, day, to get the temporal representation of whatever you want, Halloween in this case. And you can also pass it a string formatted like this, very, very standard formatting to get a temporal object. So we'll click our button, and these are nicely formatted representations of what temporal gives us. And do a little magic, I have a double click event handler on the same button, which you should probably not do in the real world, to format them nicely. I actually want to show what this nice formatting looks like because it's really easy. And again, it is like built into JavaScript once we have temporal, which is kind of amazing. Yeah, this. So I have a little function here that took these temporal objects like today date, Halloween date, New Year's date. These are the objects instantiated by temporal. And if you call to locale string on them, it will give you that nice formatting with some of your parameters. Short numeric gives you that. To locale string is not part of temporal. It's actually part of the, I think, the internationalization API, but it can be used to kind of convert things from temporal to the, I guess, internationalized or localized version of what you want. And you do that by passing like a language country code thing in here. So it's a really good illustration of how temporal is fully interoperable with the internationalization API in this case. Like it is designed to work with the rest of JavaScript, which date is not as much. You can use to locale string on date, but it behaves a little funky, not surprisingly. So that's cool. Point being, it's really easy to get what is just the date and make sure you get it right. So when you have like Aunt's grandma's birthday is November 12th or whatever, you don't accidentally get the month wrong because of zero indexing or something. Because notice, month is 10, it's not 9. October is the 10th month. We have the basically same thing for time. It's called plain time. Wow, imagine that. But this will just give you what time is it, and very, very similar API here. You can pass it parameters, you can pass it a string, and it will just give you whatever you want. So now noon midnight, very cool. It updates in real time when I click it, because it's right now, this is actually running JavaScript. That's firing the dopamine in my brain, so I'm excited by it. Yeah, here's a note on wall clock time. This is something that I had a hard time understanding, which I think is more of a me problem. They reference this thing called wall clock time a lot. What is wall clock time? There's no clock in this room, but if there was, I would look at it and say, oh, that's what time it is. It basically means time that is not time zoned. So it is, again, 10:20 here in EST, which means it's 7:20 in California. The wall clock time is what you see in each of those locations when you look at it. I'm not doing a good job explaining this and why it's important to separate time zones from wall clock time. But let's say if you want a very specific time, like 10 a.m., your presentation starts at 10 a.m. and you want to put it on your website, you can use wall clock time and make sure it always says 10 a.m. Or maybe a better example is business hours. So business is open 9 to 5, right? But if it's open 9 to 5 on the East Coast, that doesn't mean it's open 6 to 2 on the West Coast, because the business is on the East Coast. That doesn't really make sense. Like anytime you need fixed time, you use wall clock time. And these methods, like plain date, plain time, give you wall clock stuff. Well, I guess plain time gives you wall clock time versus the time zone ones. That's a lot of words to say. Temporal can do both, and it separates them out, which is important. You can combine plain date and plain time to get both wall clock time with the date. Pretty straightforward. It's just a shortcut to do both of them, which can be convenient, I'm sure. It has that same API where you can pass a thing called year, a thing called hour. Wow, really cool. Minute. I think you can get really precise with this, like millisecond, possibly even nanosecond level. So immutable date arithmetic, this is one of my favorite things. Like I mentioned, mutability in date is one of my least favorite things. This is the reverse, where temporal is immutable by default. When you do this thing and create a temporal object, it is frozen, it is immutable. You can't do anything to it, really. So I wrote a little function called add date, which is going to take this temporal object. It's going to add 10 days. Wow. And we can look under the hood to see how this works, because this is something worth taking a little bit of time on, just to really illustrate why mutable objects are important. What size is this? Immutable. There we go. So this is that add days function. This is like a custom function I wrote. There's nothing in temporal called add days, but it's just a wrapper for temporal stuff. And the important thing here is that I'm making a new variable called new date and setting it directly equal to start date. What is start date? Well, down here, I'm passing in my date. What is my date? It is a temporal object. So we're setting just an arbitrary variable to the temporal object, like literally directly equals. And that works. It doesn't do anything to my date. You can shorten this as a one-liner if you're fancy and don't like mutating variables, same thing. The easiest way to illustrate the value of this, I think, and why it is important is to compare it to date, which I will do in real time now, because I like to live dangerously. So let's say, caps lock, it's not gonna help me, I should be even bigger. My date equals new date. So we have a new date object. Let's see what the value is. It's March 14th right now, blah, blah, blah. So that's cool. We're going to do the exact same thing that we did in our temporal based function and make another variable, call it second date is equal to my date. Second date is the same thing as my date. They're literally the same. And I want to manipulate second date. I'll use set date. And you have to use second date, get date. This is that getter setter thing I mentioned earlier with date, which is kind of verbose. Versus temporal, you just do like +1, like .add. It's really nice. So now I have added a single day to second date, which is now March 15th. That's great. I like that. The problem is if I log my date, it's also March 15th. So this is a way to illustrate the fact that my date is mutable. And when you do stuff like this, which for me at least, it's really easy to do by accident, like without thinking about it. Or honestly, if you're relying on an LLM, like a lot of us do these days, myself included, it will do stuff like this. And you're like, Claude, why do you make bugs? There's ways to deal with this. Primarily, you can do third date equals new date, my date. So you make another date object from the original date object. And like you can imagine, this gets really gnarly really quickly. Temporal, we don't care about any of this. It's immutable. You can do this, and it just like knows under the hood, do not mutate the original object. This simple example is simple, but when you get into complicated stuff with dates, like it is one of those situations where a bug you caused way over here, like 2 months ago, by mutating your date will bite you 2 months later. So I think it's just going to make our life easier not to have to worry about that. Yeah, compared to date, which we did. Duration, date doesn't have duration, I mentioned, temporal does. Wow, 1 hour, 30 minutes. Again, it has this really nice API where you can feed it whatever you want in a very readable format to know how long is this thing. It'll also take strings, it'll take a couple different formats, but it's just one example of the simple one. You may ask, what the heck is PT? Because I did. P equals period, that indicates this is the beginning. T separates date from time, which we don't have any date in here. We only have time, so there's no nothing to separate. But why don't we change that actually? Presentation length, we'll do days 5. Excuse me. So if we throw a date in there, now we have 5 days. Wow. So it's just a little separator, so you know what is what. I don't really know why this is like this, other than I guess it's a standard way to kind of parse this out and say, oh, I'm using duration, like here's where it starts, here's where it is split between date and time, and you could like write a regex or whatever you need to do. More duration, you can do a lot more than just say, how long is this thing I'm providing? Something really cool you can do is calculate, like at a kind of declarative way, how long has this time span been? So we're going to start with a temporal instantiated on January 1st of this year, and then one today. And it has this method called until, where you say from the start until the end. That sounds like English, by the way, like start until end, declarative. How long has it been? So does anyone have a guess how many days we have in 2025? Because this shocked me. The answer is 72, apparently. It's been 72 days already in this year, which is crazy. Oh, my little scream guy. That's the face I made. But yeah, you can use this for really useful real world examples. Yeah, we have a question?
Yeah, real quick. When you use the string way to pass that in there, where would you set up with a temporal API to say that like month, day versus day, month, and year up?
That's a really good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but that is a really important question to ask. Like in the United States, we format dates in a certain way. That's not true of the rest of the world. I'm going to take a guess and say that you can use different formats and possibly tell it how to do that. But I don't know off the top of my head. But I feel confident saying they thought about that, so there is a way. If anyone does know, let me know.
I think I might actually.
Yeah.
So there's, in the ISO standard, when you start with the year, I think it's always universally year, month,
Okay.
day. This is true.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense, yeah, because we're weird in the US and start with the year for some reason. We start with the biggest, sure. Cool. But yeah, you can use duration to calculate useful things like how many hours am I working today? I don't know, like we do this all the time in real life. So I imagine there's a lot of uses on the computer. Let's talk about calendars. The Gregorian calendar is great. We love these guys. They make beautiful music. But just like the Byzantine monks in Constantinople in the 15th century who were sacked by the Ottoman Turks and had to learn the Islamic calendar, I assume, sometimes you have a use for different kinds of calendars. So temporal can do that. By default, it gives you a date in the Gregorian standard, but you can use these things like with calendar to generate a date in a different format. So this is the Islamic calendar representation of today. It's a little wordy, and I'm a little hazy on how this all works, because again, I had to use toLocale_string to kind of localize it into the specific format. If you don't provide toLocale_string, it actually tells you like March 14th. It's kind of weird to me. But just suffice to say, we can handle different calendars with temporal, which is really nice because date can't do it. If you, I don't know, if you're a developer for like a synagogue or something, like maybe you have to work at the Hebrew calendar, I think it's going to add a lot of kind of accessibility to things outside of Gregorian, which is great. Daylight savings time. Yeah, I got really lazy with this. I was trying to come up with a code example and my brain was just not working. So just believe me that temporal will handle DST automatically. So if you do something like, I want to add 1 hour and the time period I'm adding an hour to crosses the daylight savings time boundary, it will be smart enough to kind of adjust it accordingly. So that when you wake up and you look at your phone and it's right, you're like, wow, that adjusted. And you look at your oven and your oven is an hour behind and you say, I should put JavaScript on my oven and use it. Instance temporal has this thing called instant, which is like, what is the time like right now? So again, click it again, you get this beautiful string of the date and time right now. The important question for me was how the heck does this differ from the time zone thing we looked at earlier? The difference is that this is always in UTC time, so no time zone. This little Z at the end of the string, which I made go away, come back. That indicates UTC time. So that's I think that's an ISO format actually. Whenever you see a Z at the end of a date time string, it means UTC time. It's basically the same thing as date now. This is what date now also gives you, a non-time zone UTC representation of the immediate moment. But temporal is better because it can do nanoseconds, which really useful for all of us, I'm sure. That's where I'm going to stop with code examples because temporal is huge. We could take the entire conference time going over these one by one in painstaking detail, but I can't talk that long. 200 methods, yeah, it has a whole lot of stuff in there, which again, this is part of why it's taken so long to get implemented in browsers. It's just really big. Luckily, we only really need to know some of these, I think. The ones I went over are probably like, I'm going to guess 75, 80% of what you would do with dates and times in your day-to-day work. Well, mine at least. I don't know what y'all do, but there is so much power lurking behind that is just there for you to learn about and use. Yeah, last thing here, everything in temporal kind of builds on top of each other. So you start with that temporal object, temporal dot whatever. Interesting note, like the way you instantiate these is just by declaring a variable equal to them, right? Versus date, which is the new keyword constructor. Temporal is just like equals, which I just like better. Yeah, so you make a temporal thing and you can apply all these methods one after another to do cool stuff. So I would be unfair to library authors and such if I didn't talk about the downsides of temporal. There are a few, but they're more like this will get better type of things, I think. The first is that, yeah, it's not finished insofar as browsers and Node.js, et cetera, don't natively support it. So there's a chance things could change. I don't think the CC39 specification will change because it's stage 3, like it's not supposed to change. It's passed all of their fancy tests and stuff that they do to say this is the spec we want, but nevertheless, like it is not out there in the wild, so it could change. Yeah, to reiterate, it's really big. There's a lot of stuff to learn, so it would probably take quite a while to really familiarize yourself and be a temporal expert, but also you don't really have to be honest. This is actually a really important one. HTML form elements have pretty good integration with the date object. When you have like a date picker or an input or whatever, they just like under the hood know, oh, you should produce a format that date can work with. That is not true of temporal at the moment. So if you want to use HTML form stuff with it, you have to do a lot of like squirrely stuff to make it work. That is actively being worked on. It's also a good example of like JavaScript being one thing and I guess browsers being another, right? Like again, the people who are in TC39 are not the people who are writing JavaScript engines, who are not the people who are writing browsers. So we all have to come together in beautiful harmony to make this stuff work together, which is a work in progress. Here's a hot take. It's more verbose than date. Like the things you write will generally be longer because it's like temporal.now, blah, 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 blah. I actually like this because like code readability is important and I would rather read something that's like 50 characters and know explicitly what it means than something shorter. Being clever makes you feel good, but for other people, it can suck. Also, I guess we're all transpiling and minifying our code these days anyway, so kind of whatever. Potentially more expensive. When I say expensive, it's specifically about the immutability thing, where because you are not mutating existing objects in place, you're always making new stuff. This is apparently a real problem that some of the browser implementers ran into, where Temporal was really slow when they first tried to do it, because it was just creating many new objects. You know, they do test suites like, oh, instantiate 100,000 temporal objects and see what we can do with them. And that caused problems because the browsers were not really tweaked to handle it and sort of like garbage collect and things like that. I don't think this is something most people need to worry about, and it's something that's going to get better just by design as browsers and runtimes learn to deal with this, but something to be aware of. What about the internationalization API? This is something that confused me when I learned about Temporal, because I was like, we already have INTL. Doesn't this do a lot of the same stuff? And the answer is like, no, actually, I was wrong. It's more like they're complementary. We already saw to-locale string, which is probably the most widely used one from INTL. Yeah, they all work together nicely, which is really nice because Temporal is designed to be everywhere, not just Gregorian, not just your time zone. And in order for that to work, it has to be internationalized, internationalizable, I suppose would be the word, which it is. Here's a good question that I asked myself. Do we still need date at all? So Mozilla said, no, it's a full replacement. And well, yeah, you know, depends on who you are and what your use case is, honestly. Right now, we need it because, again, Temporal is not supported. If you go ship this thing, even with a polyfill, like you're taking that risk. Like maybe you have users who are always on the latest version of their browser, let's say power users, and you can trust that like they will have JavaScript turned on, or I don't know. But you're always taking a risk if you're not using things that are inherently supported in both the language and the browser. Form elements, I mentioned that, yeah. If you're doing form heavy work, like maybe don't use Temporal because it's probably going to be a bit of a pain. Date is still out there. It's not quite legacy code at this point because Temporal is not fully shipped, but at some point, knock on wood, it will be quote unquote legacy code. But just like jQuery is a good comparison, there is a lot more jQuery code out there in the real world, on the real internet than React, for example, despite the fact that like React's been a more modern way since, I don't know, 2015 or something. Just because like we can't rewrite every bit of code and greenfield every project every year like we would like to. So point being, if you are just getting into JavaScript, like you still need to learn date, I think, because you will see it like 100%. And that's going to be true for a long time, right? Like just like jQuery, even 5 years from now, people are still going to be using date, and, you know, whatever. Like that's just the reality of having a language with a long tail behind it, like JavaScript. This last one, I feel like I should have taken this out because it's like kind of silly and unimportant. Like because date has been around for so long, JavaScript runtimes and engines are really good at dealing with it. So it's like faster, but nah, like that's a problem that'll go away like someday. What about libraries? Do we still need libraries? Maybe. I had to use my floating CSS text again. Like what do libraries do for us? I would take a step back and say, like, beyond sort of filling in functionality that we don't have with native date, why do we like libraries? Well, they offer abstractions and often higher level APIs where you call like date-fns format. Under the hood, maybe format is like 100 lines of code, who knows? But to you, it's just .format. So that's still going to be true, I think, where libraries will build on Temporal. Some of the authors of these date libraries have said, yeah, we're looking at Temporal. We're saying, does it make sense for us to use this? Can we integrate it with our library? And some people are just going to have a preference for the way different libraries do things. So to compare date-fns again to something like moments, they're more of a functional versus object-oriented approach. Some people really like one or the other. And if that's true, then like, great, use what you like. So I think there is a good chance in, again, 5 years, like, people will still be NPM or whatever we're using for a package manager then. installing date-fns hyper or whatever they call it, like, but it might use temporal under the hood. Last slide here. When can you use temporal? Just in time for when you need it. Ha, ha, ha. I'll explain what I mean by that, which I kind of already said several times. We don't know when this is going to be done. Like, we've been hearing for literally years, like, oh yeah, it's going to be in stage 4 soon. Like, Firefox is going to flip that flag and you'll have it available. But like, as of today, no. So I don't know. Who knows? I've stopped thinking about it. Like one day I'll read a headline or listen to a podcast and be like, temporal is out there. Wow. A picture of John Carmack, a very young John Carmack, the guy who made the Doom and Quake engines, among other things. He was asked about one of his games, like Doom 3 or something once, and they said, when is it going to be done? And he said, it'll be done when it's done. So that's where I think temporal is at. It'll be done when it's done. And in the meantime, polyfills, once again, like they're stable, they're production ready. You take a risk of using a polyfill if you make that choice, but like if you want to be really trendy and use this today, you can. Like I have one of these polyfills like downloaded locally so I can run it, and I formatted this on save accidentally, so it looks kind of goofy. But like you can just download the polyfill or pull it in through a CDN or install it as a package or whatever, and like there's an implementation of temporal right there.
What's the size comparison between the polyfill and libraries?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's look at that. That is a really good question that I meant to talk about earlier, where a polyfill can be thought of like a library, right? Like it's effectively, that's what it is. It's a library that conforms to a TC39 specification, but there is the same overhead where, how big do they say they are? So temporal polyfill is one I was using. They say it's 20 kilobytes. This other one is 56 kilobytes. So they're not nothing. And yeah, actually some of the libraries now like Day.js they say they're like 2 kilobytes, but that's only the base. If you want things like time zones and internationalization, you often have to add like sort of plugins or other libraries. So I'd say it's comparable. Let's put it that way. Like you're going to be installing 20 to 50 KB of JavaScript to use this thing right now. But the cool thing is, like, if I had this polyfill and then in 6 months, Chrome or whatever supports temporal, I just uninstall the polyfill. And because the API spec conforms to temporal, it just magically goes away. And then my bundle is smaller. I think that's all I got. Yeah. So thank you all for coming. I hope that was enlightening. I really encourage you to go like play with this thing, go download Polyfill, go look up like a StackBlitz or Code Sandbox with it because it's there and you can do cool stuff. Yeah, and thanks Galen Cash for putting this all together. He's the man. Get a chance to talk to him if you haven't. Thanks our volunteers for their time and our sponsors. Woo!